And the breaking news just keeps on coming. So, pretty good start to the day for my sports teams with the Robbie Ray signing. And yes, I know that there are some downsides to it, but I do consider it to be a positive overall, easily. And now we have ourselves another major announcement from another one of my sports teams that I would consider to be, at the very least, more good than bad. And the irony of these announcements coming from teams that are not the Seahawks is not lost on me. Hey, Seahawks, get your shit straight, or else you're going to lose attention in the Pacific Northwest to these other teams. Believe me, it'll happen. So, we have a head coach in Washington. Kalen DeBoer is the new head coach of Washington Huskies football. And this was a guy who had clearly been identified as a strong candidate in recent days. There was a lot of enthusiasm behind him possibly being the guy. There was a lot of reason to believe that he was going to be the guy. He is now the guy. It's been heavily rumored since, I don't know, 3 hours ago. But earlier this hour, about less than an hour ago, it was confirmed. He is the new head coach in Washington, replaces Jimmy Lake or Bob Gregory, or however you want to parse that out. He's the new grand poobah of Washington Husky football. So I was aware of some of the big names in our coach hunt, but I didn't do a ton of research into every candidate who came across my desk. So we're going to take a look at him a little bit now that we know he's the guy, and we're going to try to figure out how to feel about this. But my initial impression, based off what I saw when I did some initial hunting, was that this seems reasonable. Kalen DeBoer has a pretty good resume, particularly in terms of helping quarterbacks develop and helping offenses produce. And that's largely what we're going to be looking for next year in Washington. So right off the bat, I like it. But what am I going to pretend like I watch every Fresno State game these last couple years? No, of course not. Sometimes it's really hard to know who's going to be a good head coach and who won't be a good head coach. Sometimes you just don't know until they actually get to go out there and do the job. So we'll find out over the next few years, but Kalen DeBoer is getting the shot. So let's take a look at him. So Wikipedia tells me he just turned 47, so reasonably young if he's good. And if he doesn't make a break for the NFL or something, you have yourself a head coach for a long time. And wouldn't that be wonderful? Not have to worry about this stuff. So, if you take a look at his coaching experience, it goes back to 1997, but a lot of this stuff, not really all that worth looking at. Like, he was a wide receiver coach at Sioux Falls. He was a assistant coach at Washington State High School. He was at Southern Illinois for a few years, Eastern Michigan as an offensive coordinator. So that stuff, good for him. Obviously, you can parse some stuff out of that, but I'm going to focus on his last 5 years, particularly his last 2 years, because his last 2 years were actually spent as the head coach of the Fresno State Bulldogs. So first, let's just take a look at brass tacks here. His coaching record with a significant program. Well, I mean, I'm not looking at stuff like what he did at Sioux Falls, right? Like good for him. Nothing wrong with building yourself up over time as a coach. But if you take a look at what he's done at a big boy school, and Fresno State's not even a big boy school, but they're a Division I team, I think. They're a real team. They're not some Division III squad that has no place being compared to the Oregons and the USCs of the world. Fresno State has at least 2 functioning legs to stand on when compared to schools like that. He coached for 2 years, and he had a record of 12-6. He went 3-3 during the COVID year, and then 9-3 in the most recent season. Pretty good, not amazing. He wasn't like Chris Peterson making Boise State into a borderline powerhouse, but he had some success, and you can see why, looking at this track record, we decided to bring him in. But let's go a level deeper and take a look at his recent experience at some of these schools of moderate significance, starting with 2017 when he was an offensive coordinator slash quarterback coach for the Fresno State Bulldogs. So the 2017 Bulldogs went 10-4, so they were a good team in the MWC. The issue, looking at it initially, is that they went 10-4 on the back of their defense. They actually had one of the 10 best defenses in terms of points allowed in all of college football, less than 18 points a game. Their offense was near the bottom, 77th, not even in the top half. And if you take a look at his quarterback that year, Marcus McNarian, he was very pedestrian. 62% completion, 2,700 yards, 14 touchdowns, 5 picks. Not terrible, but not particularly good either. And then DeBoer came back the next year, and Fresno State was even better, 12-2. And their offense was now a part of the reason why. They had an offense that scored close to 35 points a game, 26th, 14 points allowed a game, 3rd. So the defense was still the better of the two, but it was still a really good, really improved offense. And if you take a look at his quarterback, it's the same guy, but now he's completing almost 69% of his passes. Now he's throwing for 3,600 yards, 25 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Big steps forward for his responsibilities. So Marcus McNarian went from a pedestrian starting QB to a really good starting QB. The offense went from below average to borderline really good. And Kalen DeBoer, you can give him a lot of credit for that. It's the same quarterback, like I said. McMarian was the lion's share of the starter for the whole season. And one other thing that I found kind of interesting here, if you look at some of these numbers, they didn't do it with a dominant running game. They were not one of these teams that would just run the ball for 250 yards a game. They actually did a lot of their stuff through the passing attack. They were I would call them a pass-first team for the most part. Okay, so at that point, DeBoer left Fresno State and went to Indiana to be the offensive coordinator slash quarterback for a year. And Indiana went 8-5, underwhelming but not bad. Pretty good, actually. They scored about 32 points a game, which was 43rd in the nation. Good, not anything better than good, but good. And if you take a look at the quarterback that he was responsible for coaching, there were really two of them, Peyton Ramsey and Michael Penix. Mostly Peyton Ramsey, who had an okay season, 2,400 yards, high completion percentage, 13 touchdowns, 5 picks. Penix, similarly efficient, had slightly more than half the yards on slightly more than half the attempts, 10 touchdowns, 4 picks, pretty good. And again, it was a team mostly driven by their passing attack, which I find to be kind of interesting. So at this point, Kalen DeBoer had 3 years of credible work as an offensive coordinator slash quarterback coach, and he had turned a Fresno State offense from below average to really good. He had made an Indiana offense that used 2 different quarterbacks look good, and he had shown that he could develop a quarterback from being just mediocre at best to very solid. So his work on offenses at this point is credible. I would say that at the very least. And that would all be well and good enough if we were hiring him as a head coach based off that. But we actually did get 2 years of Kalen DeBoer at Fresno State as a full-on head coach, which gives us a bigger sample size to choose from. So let's take a look at exactly what the Fresno State Bulldogs did over the last 2 seasons. And keep in mind, we're going to look at the COVID year, but I wouldn't take the COVID year that seriously because, it was weird. I think we all remember. Okay, 2020, Fresno State went 3-3, like I said. They had a good offense. It was 36th in the league. They averaged 32.8 points a game, almost 33 points. And they were able to scrape out those 3 wins despite a defense that was around average. And if you take a look at his quarterback, our old friend Jake Haener, this year he played and started and pretty much took every meaningful snap. 64.7% completion, 2,000 yards, 14 touchdowns, 5 picks. Not a whole lot going on in the running game either for this offense, by the way. I think they actually had Yeah, they had less than 1,000 yards rushing. I know it was only 6 games, but this was not a team that was completely just leaning on some hand it off, hand it off, hand it off, hand it off, 250 rushing yards a game type stuff. No, they were mostly passing the ball, and they had moderate success with that. Now we go to 2021, and this is where you can really start to learn something because we had a full season, 9-3. 28th in the nation in points per game, 33.6. So the offense gets a little better. The defense gets a lot better. That's the main reason why they improved so much as a team, granted. They were now 22nd in the league, nation in defense, about 20 points a game. So the reason why the team improved a lot was because the defense got better, which is not necessarily Kalen DeBoer's area of expertise, but nevertheless, he was the head coach and he is responsible for the whole team. And the offense got better too. And if you take a look at Jake Haener and how he develops, because a big reason why you bring in DeBoer is to develop your new quarterback, Sam Heward, because whether or not he can have a good college career is going to determine the direction of this program right now. Jake Haener increased his completion percentage to 67.5, threw for 3,800 yards, 32 touchdowns, 9 picks, much better season. And if you take a look at the rushing numbers, excuse me, sorry. Fresno State was not some dominant running team. They mostly got things done through the air. So Jake Haener developed. So that's another quarterback that DeBoer was really able to bring along. And that excites me because Sam Heward is supposed to be the guy. And through the very little action we saw him in 2021, he didn't look like the guy. But the right coach can develop him, and hopefully DeBoer can be that coach. Based off the evidence that I'm looking at here, it seems to me that he is that guy. Sorry about that, guys, by the way. I don't know what the hell just got in my windpipe right there. And yeah, that's really all I can say about DeBoer that I think is really worth spending a lot of time looking at. We could go over what he did at places like Southern Illinois and Sioux Falls, but I think the last 5 years give me enough to work with here. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that and say that I like the hire. It seems reasonable to me. Again, people like us who are just watching football, it's hard to know who's actually going to make a good head coach. There are elements of being a head coach that you don't know until you get there. And the nice thing is DeBoer spent a couple years as a head coach, so we know that he can at least do it on some functional level. Now, can he do it for a bigger program than Fresno State? Obviously, the stakes are a little different at a school like UW. And that's just something we're going to have to find out with, but we are starting from a pretty good position, I think, with this guy. I'm excited. I'm ready to give him a chance. Look, Pac-12 probably on the upswing. We know Oregon's going to always be good. USC is going to be good now because they got Lincoln Riley. Pac-12's on the upswing. We got to keep up. Jesus. We got to keep up. Wazoo might be good going forward. I don't know exactly what Wazoo's going to be, but they look like they've got it starting to get it. So let's figure it out. Good hire. Let's go from here. See you guys later. Bow down to Washington.